Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Wednesday, May 29th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news, and we'll also answer a couple of questions in the mailbag. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at slashfilm.com, and I am joined on today's podcast by Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman
Hey, that's me.
and writer Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey everyone.
All right, so Brad, we didn't have you on the podcast yesterday. You were busy, but you're here today, and we have a few news items to get into. Like I said, we'll jump into the mailbag in just a little bit. I actually want you to talk a little bit about Booksmart, Brad, because I know you saw that recently and enjoyed that. So I didn't want you to have to wait all the way until next week when we do a mailbag episode or a water cooler episode to talk about that. So we'll get to that. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about the news. So there is a Love, Simon Disney Plus series coming. And Brad, what do we know about that show now?
Yeah, so Disney Plus is turning the Fox property into a TV series. It comes after Disney purchased Fox and acquired various movie and TV properties from them. And we just recently got wind of two of the main characters that will be the focus of the new series, and they are characters who were not in the original movie. So the series will not merely be retelling the story of Love, Simon with new actors, and it won't continue the story of Simon either. Instead, there will be a new lead character named Victor, who is said supposed to be a Latin teenager around 15 or I think 16 or 17 years old. And he's described as being, quote, closeted, really cute, athletic, well-liked, and warm-hearted. He's also the high school soccer star. So that's quite a different character than Simon was in the original movie. He was a closeted teenager, and he was a cute kid too, but he wasn't, this star athlete or anything like that. So that'll bring a different dynamic to the table. And then his love interest is supposed to be another teenage kid named Benji. And this casting, they're being a little bit more open about. He's out of the closet. He's very comfortable, and he's described as being a, quote, super cute hipster dreamboat with perfectly messy hair and perfectly ripped jeans. And he's the kind of kid who's so dreamy that he looks like he's moving in slow motion. And so unlike the casting call for the role of Victor, the role of Benji, they want to get somebody who is actually a gay, bisexual, pansexual, or sexually fluid actor, which is kind of similar to with Love, Simon, because Nick Robinson, at least as far as I know, is not actually gay, but he played, a gay kid in Love, Simon. What's interesting about this is that when the news of the Love, Simon TV series originally hit, it was said that it was supposed to be a series focusing on the sequel book, Leah on the Offbeat, which focuses on Simon's best friend Leah and her struggles with college and self-esteem, her own sexuality, feeling like an outsider, and all of that stuff. But this, with knowing that Victor is this lead character, it seems like they're just doing a different version of Love, Simon with a couple new characters instead.
Well, I mean, the question that I have to ask in this instance is, if Simon is not going to be the main character of the show, does Love, Simon really make sense for the title for this thing?
The Love, Simon Extended Universe.
Yeah, that's kind of my thing too. Like, the only thing I can think of is that it's like maybe it'll take place in the same universe. Like maybe they go to the same high school and they'll make reference to that, and so that there's some kind of tie-in factor there. But yeah, otherwise it seems weird to call the show Love, Simon if they're not going to be a part of it at all.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of sounds similar to what I think the YouTube is doing with the Edge of 17 series, which basically just uses the IP of the movie, which wasn't a major hit to begin with, but it's a recognizable IP of some sort. And they're kind of just telling a completely different story that's inspired or loosely based on the original film.
Yeah. I guess
the character isn't named 17.
Right. Right, yeah.
That's true.
HT, you saw Love, Simon the movie. I have not seen it, but I know you and Brad both saw it. What did you think about the movie, and what do you think about the potential of a Disney Plus show even without Nick Robinson's Simon character coming back?
It's really good. I remember really liking Love, Simon. I thought that it was a little bit twee at some points, but it was such a heartfelt and sweet film that, that kind of, I was able to forgive that. And it's so rare to see a like gay film in a typical high school comedy setting. And so that in of itself was like very revolutionary. So I really enjoyed Love, Simon. I think the performances were great. Like the high school comedy setting was just like so spectacular, and just like the film itself was just really nice. I don't know how I feel about this new show, especially since it is called Love, Simon and is not starring a character named Simon. I would be fine maybe if they even just rebooted it with, a new Simon instead of changing the characters. But yeah, I don't know how I feel about this. I have my own mixed feelings about Disney moving their sort of mid-budget properties onto streaming and TV. But yeah, we'll see. I'm sure this is something that will appeal to like the streaming audiences. It feels like Disney Plus here is trying to target specifically like the Netflix demographic who loves shows like On Your Block and all those teen-centric shows that have somewhat similar settings and themes, and in this case, Love, Simon kind of is tailor-made for that.
Yeah, for sure. And Brad, I know you're going to subscribe to Disney Plus because that's like a given considering all the Star Wars content that they're going to be having there and Marvel stuff as well. With all of that content, though, do you think you're going to have time to watch Love, Simon, this Disney Plus show? Or is this something you're going to like make an effort to work into your viewing schedule, considering how much you enjoyed the movie?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did enjoy the movie, and I agree with a lot of what HT said, because it definitely does have a little bit of that cheesy sentimental factor to it. But I think what works in its favor is that even though it hits all the familiar traditional cliche romantic comedy high school beats, doing it with a gay lead character does make it refreshing, because they're not making like a huge deal out of it. They're just making a normal romantic comedy with a lead character who happens to be gay. And I love that. And I like the idea of Disney continuing to do that with a new series on Disney Plus. Even if the title does seem like a weird choice. So I'm curious, but you do bring up the idea of whether or not I can fit into my schedule, and that is tough. There's just a lot of content out there, and so I'll probably wait and see, how the trailer looks, see if it's a show that piques my interest, something like that. But it's one of those things where there's so much content out there. It is impossible to keep up with everything new, even if it's something that you are interested in. So it's a wait and see game for me, I think.
All right. Well, speaking of content that you may or may not be interested in, Handmaid's Tale Season 3, HT, I think it's fair to say that the show has had, it started out really great, and I think the reaction to Season 2 was a little bit more divisive. What did you think about Season 3? You teased this a little bit on yesterday's episode of the podcast, but now your review is up at slashfilm.com. I will link to it in the show notes. You can finally tell us now, what is the deal with Handmaid's Tale Season 3?
Season 3 is a bit of an improvement from Season 2, although it has a bit of a slow start where it kind of feels like it's more of the same, but it does attempt to remedy a lot of the problems that I specifically had with Season 2, in which it was just overly bleak and almost soapy in parts, and it felt like the show itself was resistant to any sort of change, because a lot of of Season 2 was sort of spinning its wheels and kind of biding its time before trying to do anything like revolutionary anyway. And The Handmaid's Tale Season 3 does hint at some sort of revolution, although it takes a long time to get there. And I will say, like, the first 2-3 episodes are pretty sluggish, but after that we start to get into something that both shifts the narrative and starts to shift the tone a little bit into something that's more akin to a political thriller, and which I was really intrigued by and wanted to see more of. So I will say Season 3, while it still has some of the issues of Season 2, and kind of by following June, played by Elizabeth Moss, so closely, we still have the issues of just kind of being too embedded in her perspective, and she becomes somewhat of a frustrating protagonist. It does have some improvements in terms of like becoming less bleak, a little bit more brisk, and moving beyond that cautionary tale allegory of Margaret Atwood's novel, and doing something a little bit different and a little bit more dynamic with its narrative arc.
So one of my favorite aspects of the show is the cinematography, just the production design, the style, the whole look of the show. Have they done anything to change up the look, or change or introduce any new settings or anything like that?
There are some new settings. There's actually a foray into Washington, D.C., which is really interesting because it shows another city in Gilead, which is even more totalitarian than Boston, which is where the show mostly takes place. And that is a really interesting look at the world and kind of expand some of the world building that the show has kind of strayed away from. I remember during season 2 we had a little hint of that with the colonies, but I wanted to see a little bit more of the world and what was happening. But here it's still kind of slow in introducing different aspects of that, but we do get different settings, and there's some really striking imagery, especially that comes with the DC sort of segue or subplot, and it's pretty well done. There's some really striking imagery that recalls like Nazi imagery and everything, and it's I won't go further into it, but you can read my full review on slashfilm.com.
Awesome. Yeah, and again, we'll link to that in the show notes. Let's move on. I'm very excited. When does this come out, HD?
It hits Hulu on June 5th.
Okay, June 5th. So that's pretty soon. All right, so let's talk about the Black Widow movie. We don't really know much about this film. Brad, tell us what we do know and the most recent update on Marvel's newest movie.
Yes, so Black Widow will have Scarlett Johansson back as Natasha Romanoff, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent and assassin turned Avenger. Well, we know that, I guess we don't technically know, but it kind of has to be a prequel given her fate in Avengers Endgame. At the very least, it has to be something that takes place before the events of Avengers Endgame, unless she suddenly is coming back to life. But beyond that, we don't really know much about the story details, though we do know that the cast includes Florence Pugh from Fighting With My Family, Rachel Weisz, and David Harbour. The movie is being directed by Kate Shortland, has a script by Captain Marvel writer Jack Schaefer, and even though we don't know anything, the movie is actually in production right now over in Norway under the working title of Blue Bayou. It's shooting in a village over there. Unfortunately, I can't pronounce it because I am not Norwegian. And it does have one of those odd characters in it. But it is underway, and initially, I guess the locals thought that it was a James Bond movie that was shooting nearby, because that also is shooting somewhere else in Norway. But it has since been confirmed that it is indeed Black Widow, because Blue Bayou was actually really revealed to be the working title a little while back when the movie was still getting the cast together. It's difficult to say whether or not this actually means anything for the movie itself. We discussed this among the team, and Peter, our resident theme park guru, said that Blue Bayou is the name of a restaurant that's part of the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction in the park, has Cajun and Creole cuisine. It's been around since Disneyland opened back in 1967. But that seems unlikely unless Black Widow has some kind of affinity for New Orleans culture or Pirates of the Caribbean. One thing that I came to mind for me is there's a famous song called Blue Bayou that was originally recorded by Roy Orbison back in '63, and then became even more famous because Linda Ronstadt did a cover of it that became a big hit and was one of her signature songs. And if you go listen to the song, or if you know the song and you go read the lyrics, the kind of sadness that is evoked from the song, or longing, mixed with a little bit of hope, is something that you could easily tie to Black Widow as a character, as far as her isolation based on being raised as an assassin, not having a family of her own during those times, and even a longing to belong, and feeling like she finally did when she became part of the Avengers. But more likely than not, the title is merely just something that was pulled by somebody who either has some kind of personal tie to Blue Bayou for some way, because most of the working titles for Marvel movies don't really have any significant meaning to the movies themselves. For example, the working titles for the Spider-Man movies, for Homecoming and Far From Home, were The Fall of George and Bosco, and those are just references to Seinfeld episodes. So more than likely, Blue Bayou is just something that they settled on to use as a code name, so that if anyone ever stumbled upon a movie called Blue Bayou Shooting and they didn't know that it was the Black Widow movie, they wouldn't be bothered to stick around to try and take pictures or anything.
Yeah, that sounds right. When I was on the set of Ant-Man and the Wasp a little while back, they said that the shooting title for that was Cherry Blue, and we asked Peyton Reed, the director, about it, and he said that it was just a reference to one of his favorite Tim and Eric sketches. So apparently that had nothing to do with the movie at all either. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's no like direct reference. But the song thing is interesting, and I think you embedded that song in your article about that, which we have linked to in the show notes. So if you want to listen to that song, you can do that there. And then before we jump into the mailbag, Brad, I know, like I mentioned before, you saw Booksmart recently, and I just wanted to give you open the floor and have you talk about that movie so you didn't have to wait a full week to talk about it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, because I saw Booksmart and I've been waiting with great excitement and anticipation to see this movie ever since Jacob saw it at South by Southwest, and he and plenty of other critics who saw it there were singing its praises. The trailers only got me more excited to see it. It looked hilarious, and this movie was totally my jam, right up my alley. Great coming-of-age story. Caitlin Dever and Beanie Feldstein are this incredible comic duo. I love that this is basically, a female version of Superbad, and it features Jonah Hill's sister, Beanie Feldstein, as one of the two people, in this movie. But this movie it's much more than a female version of Superbad, because this is such an accurate, authentic depiction of high school today, and it has such a wide breadth of different characters. It's very inclusive in that way, and not in a way that feels forced either. Like, as somebody who has a teenage sister who recently graduated high school and is gay, I've been witness to what high school is and how it's changed even since Superbad came out. And I also did my student teaching, so I got to experience that firsthand as well. And this is just such a great representation of teenage life today. It's ruckusly hilarious. It is just a fantastic movie. All the supporting characters in this movie are great too, including Billie Lourd, Carrie Fisher's daughter, who is like a scene stealer in this movie. And if you have been missing Carrie Fisher, the spirit of the wild, crazy side of her is alive in Billie Lourd in this movie. I'm so excited to see what Olivia Wilde does as a filmmaker next, because she clearly has just a keen eye for not just for comedy, but for crafting a story that has a lot of heart to it. Is visually interesting and just fantastic overall. And I'm just in love with this movie, and I would be very surprised if it didn't end up on my top 10 by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think all of us agree with all of that. We were singing its praises as well yesterday on the podcast, and I hope that people get it. I hope that if anybody out there is listening and is on the fence about this movie, hearing all of us talk about it will convince you to go see it, because I know it hasn't performed that well at the box office, and it's gotten completely creamed by Aladdin, which was probably expected, but still, I think this is a movie that I think is, Jacob has called it like an instant classic, and I think that is an appropriate descriptor of this film. I think this is something that all of us are going to be thinking about for a long time. So I hope that anybody who values our opinion in any way takes that to heart, especially, and goes out and grab a bunch of your friends and go see this movie, because it's really terrific. So all right, let's jump into the mailbag, guys. There's a couple questions here that I thought would be fun for us to answer. Jason D from Sydney, Australia writes in, "Hey Peter, I just have a question and request for the mailbag. What music track would each of you want to be in the Guardians 3 movie? And can someone please tweet James Gunn to put January by Pilot in the movie? I think that it would be perfect for that film." So I've linked to January by Pilot, which is a song I'd never heard of before, in the show notes already. So if you guys want to listen to that, you can do that. But I want to open it up to you guys. HT, do you have any songs that you would love to hear in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3?
So at this point, he has a Zune, right?
I think that's correct, yeah.
He does, yes.
Do we know if does that mean that the songs will no longer be limited to the 80s and it'll just be like whatever? If so, that's too big of a premise for me.
Yeah, Brad, do you know?
They haven't explicitly said, but since it's a Zune, that means it would have had to have existed after those decades. So I would assume that there's probably some modern music on there. So, but yeah, so it's within a reasonable thought that we could get some 90s, maybe even 2000s music now.
Oh my
Interesting.
goodness.
I had not considered that. Okay, so HT, to to limit the scope of this question, let's keep it to music that would be appropriate for the first two movies. Then, sort of in line with that, so we don't have to open it up to such an astronomical, level of choice for you.
This is still very hard prompts, I feel like, because the music has to very much suit the film itself, and I don't really know. I guess we don't really know yet what Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 will entail. So I'm just gonna go with "Toxic" by Britney Spears because not to pull in another Doctor Who thing, but there's an episode of Doctor Who where they go to the year 5 billion and they play Toxic in space, and it's campy and weird and great, and I feel like Guardians of the Galaxy 3 could pull off something like that. I don't know. That's my very random take on it.
All right, awesome. Brad, what about you?
So I went with a different month titled song, and I kind of kept it in line with the Guardians of the Galaxy musical style, because I would love to hear Earth, Wind, and Fire's September in a Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And I think, if anything, it would be a great end of the movie celebration, we love all these characters kind of thing, and a way to say goodbye to this iteration of the Guardians of the Galaxy, since James Gunn had previously said that this movie is supposed to complete the arc of this version of the team. So I wouldn't mind hearing this song as a little fond send-off to them.
Yeah, that's a great one. My pick is "I'd Really Love to See You Tonight" by England Dan and John Ford Coley. That's a song that you've probably heard on adult contemporary stations on the radio and stuff. It's not exactly like a household name kind of song, but it's also not like a full-on deep cut, so I feel like it sits right there in that James Gunn wheelhouse of recognizable but not too recognizable. I'll link to all of these songs in the show notes so people can hear them and don't. Or maybe I was gonna say maybe I'll play them right now, but I don't know if legally we're allowed to do that. So anyway, yeah, I like the song a lot. I think I can totally see it as a playing over the background of a Peter Quill Gamora romance moment or something, or maybe one of them longing for the other one or something, because Avengers Endgame sort of reset their relationship in a really interesting way. So it's not as comfortable as it once was. So now I feel like if they're interested in rekindling that romance, they're gonna have to basically start from scratch again. So anyway, this song is just the one that popped to mind that I feel like would underscore that particular story pretty well, if that's something that James Gunn ends up going with. So yeah, there you go, Jason. Thanks for writing in. And then also we have one more question. This one is from Tyler from Seattle. He says, "Hey Peter and Splash Film Daily Crew, my wife and I have made it a tradition to fly out to LA every year for Halloween Horror Nights. We have been adding on a studio tour the last few years, and we've really enjoyed them. So far, we've done Paramount, Warner Brothers, and this year we did Sony. I think those are the big ones, but do you happen to know of any other ones that are available? We would love to do a Disney Lucasfilm or a Pixar, but as far as I can tell, those are not open to the public. Love the show." So, HT, you've been to Pixar. Brad, have you been to Pixar as well?
I have.
Okay, so both of you, lucky people, have been to Pixar. I have not yet.
Yes.
You guys have gotten tours of Pixar, as members of the press. Do you happen to know when you were there if there are actual tours offered to civilians, regular people?
As far as I know, you have to know somebody there, who can get you in to actually take a tour of the campus. It's not a place that you can just walk up to and buy a ticket to get a tour of Pixar. So that is definitely a more exclusive experience.
Yeah. But I've done a bunch of the Los Angeles movie studio tours, and I threw this out to everybody earlier in our Slack channel. HT, you said you had not done any of them. HT, have you visited LA? I'm sure I've asked you this before.
I have never gone to LA.
Okay. You got to come out. You got to come out and check it out.
I need to visit. Crash on some couches.
Do it. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Brad, you have done a couple of these, right?
Yes, I did. Well, I've done the Sony tour. I did when I first had arrived in LA to do an internship and complete my degree. But that was around 10 years ago, and there's not a ton of it that I remember, except I do remember that they did take us through the Jeopardy soundstage, which was pretty cool to see. And weirdly enough, too, actually after the tour was over and my friend and I were leaving, we actually ran into Seth Rogen, who was coming out of one of the buildings after like having a meeting. So that was fun.
Nice.
That was fun. And then I've done the Universal Studios tour, which is a ride that you can take once you're in Universal Studios. So since they're going for Halloween Horror Nights, I'm sure that's something that they've probably experienced already. But that's a cool one because they take you around on like a golf cart train, and you see a bunch of sets that are still standing. Like they take you through like the Desperate Housewives neighborhood and through the plane wreckage scene in the suburbs from War of the Worlds and stuff like that. And then there's like a lot of other backlot areas on the Universal lot. But otherwise, if they've covered those, like those are pretty much the big ones. I know that Disney has some kind of big, expensive behind the scenes like experience that you can do, but it's like a week-long thing, and I think you have to spend like $3,500 to do it or something like that.
Wow, that is insane.
Yeah, because it's like a resort thing too, where you go and you stay there, and like there's meals and you get to go do a bunch of this cool behind the scenes stuff. So that's a really expensive thing.
And that's at the Disney Park in Anaheim, is that right?
Yeah, so that's at Disneyland Resort in Southern California, and it gives you like this behind the scenes tour of Walt Disney Studios and the Jim Henson Company lot. And like I said, that's a whole thing where like you're there for 6 days, and there's meals, and there's 14 different places they take you to, and it's really expensive. So if that sounds like something you can afford or interested in, just go look up Adventures by Disney and see what that's about.
Yeah, that one sounds pretty cool. I did like several years ago when I was writing for a website called Geek Tyrant. I did a full ranking of the LA movie studio tours, and I'll link to that in the show notes because it's pretty in depth. But as far as I know, there's only 4 really big studio tours, and it sounds like this person has already done most of them. So Warner Brothers, Paramount, Universal, and Sony. And as you mentioned, Brad, Universal is like, it's more of a ride almost than like an official tour. It's definitely the most impersonal of the big 4 because it's basically just like you get on a cart and you get to drive around and see a bunch of cool stuff, but it's not, at all the other tours you're broken up into like really small groups, and this is just like a massive tour cart with a ton of other guests who jump on it at the same time. But I love the Warner Brothers tour. That's the one that I think has the most to offer for people who especially love, old stuff, DC movies even, but like Casablanca and like classic films. Like there are so many really great things that they can point out to you on the Warner Brothers lot. It's sad that there's really only 4, and the Disney lot is in Burbank, but I don't think they do any sort of tour there or any sort of official one anyway. And then now that Disney has acquired Fox never did a studio tour. Their lot is located in Culver City, California, and they never offered a studio tour. And I'm very doubtful that Disney is going to suddenly start offering one there now that they've acquired them. So anyway, yeah, that's the breakdown. But I think this person who sent us this message, Tyler from Seattle, I think you've probably already seen the best of the best out there if you've already done Paramount, Warner Brothers, Sony. So yeah, I would just say make sure to actually go on that ride at Universal, the backlot tour, and then you'll pretty much have completed the the whole thing there. Before we sign off for today, I forgot to mention that Jacob Hall, the managing editor of Slash Film, sent his own suggestion into the previous question about which music he would want to hear in Guardians Volume 3. He said that I should read this on the podcast. He said, Guardians Volume 3 needs to have songs written by Jen Steinman, classic Meatloaf, the Streets of Fire soundtrack. This is a necessity. Make it happen, James Gunn. So anybody out there who recognizes any of that and thinks that it's appropriate, I'm sure will appreciate Jacob's response and contribution to this discussion. All right, so before we officially sign off, where can we find more of your work online? HT, let's start with you.
You can find me writing every day at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at Hoai-Tran Bui.
Brad?
Always on slashfilm.com, also on Twitter at Ethan_Anderton, and my own podcast, Go Flix Yourself, on iTunes and other podcasting platforms.
You can find me writing at slashfilm.com as well. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Ben Pears, and you can find more about all the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com and linked inside the show notes. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Podcast, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps, and send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. We really appreciate that. Also, if you could, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. That really, really helps us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show, spread the word, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.